out of here on time at 9 o'clock. I think we'll go ahead and get started now. This program today is particularly special to me because it has meant a lot to me and my walk, my faith, and my experience with prayer. I want to introduce to you a family that's very close to me, the Stocktons. In the back is Papa Stockton, Sean, little son Tanner, and Hunter. And Cheri's going to come up here and share their story with you. In early 2008, their life was changed in a way in which it would never return to what it was before. Hunter developed a lump on his shoulder that ended up being a Ewing sarcoma that had involved the shoulder blade on the inside and out and had some spots in his lungs as well. And their experience with that, in terms of their prayer, their faith throughout that, and how God used that adversity for good, has been a real testimony to me. It's been a pleasure for me to be a part of that and to walk part of that walk with Cheri, because she works with me in the office, and if she can get through that, she can get through this other stuff. So we're gonna talk a little bit about that, and I think as we go through this story, you'll see how prayer is very powerful in healing, and you'll see something about her faith that not only endured what she went through, but also grew during the process, and how God has used this adversity to bring her and her family to a better place. And it's just been a pleasure for me to be part of that with them. Cheri, you want to just start off by telling me what was one of the first signs that you saw that Hunter had anything wrong with him at all? When did you suspect something was wrong?
My husband and my boys, we were at the park one day, and I noticed a lump on the back of his scapula, his shoulder blade. It was the size of my fist. He was 6, so he was... I don't like this microphone, sorry. Hold it like this? Okay, that works. So we noticed he was like, his arm was hanging like this. And we knew something was wrong. It wasn't right. So I took him to the emergency room where we lived. They felt around. They did x-rays, and then they did a sonogram and told me that it was a mass. And they recommended an MRI. So
how were you feeling at that time? That must have been a little scary.
It was very scary. I mean, I felt like my whole entire life had just passed in front of me, and knew that I needed to know what was going on.
And your next step was?
I brought everything in to our family doctor, which is him, and he reviewed everything. He looked at the notes from the hospital, emergency room. He looked at the scan results, and he wanted us to see a pediatric orthopedic in Fairfax. When we went, I got an appointment like 2 days later. When we went, he told me it was 999 out of 1,000. It was not cancer, but they still had to investigate. So a week later, we had the MRI, and I got the report at work, and it was devastating. I see reports like that all the time come across my desk at work, but this was my child.
So your next step from there was for them to put you in touch with some specialists, I guess, to arrange for care.
Before that, he had the MRI, I got the report, and then he had a biopsy 2 days later. And then by the following Monday, they called me and told me that it was malignant. The doctor, the original orthopedic had referred Hunter to the cancer center at Fairfax, and they were wonderful. I mean, I didn't have to do anything. And so then it happened really, really quickly. He went right in to the hospital. He had tests, scans, everything you can imagine, poked, prodded. And then a week later, they started him on chemo.
So when they were talking to you about their treatment protocol, what kinds of things did they offer you for the treatment? And what did they say that you could expect as a result of his response to that treatment?
I think the first thing they told me was that it had metastasized, it spread to his lungs, 20 nodules within his lungs. They weren't sure, it may have spread here. They would have to figure that out later. They told me that he had a 30% chance of survival because of the fact that it metastasized to his lungs.
So we had a growth that was on both sides of the shoulder blade, on the inside of the surface and the outside surface. 20 spots in his lungs, and maybe some under his arm.
Yes.
And they talked about, I guess, radiation, chemo, surgery.
It was going to be an almost a year-long procedure, a whole thing. He would have chemo for 3 months, then he would have a surgery, a resection of the whole shoulder, remove the tumor. But they'd shrink it first because it was big. And then he would have 3 more months of chemo, and then he would have radiation to his lungs.
Did they offer you prayer?
The physicians themselves did not. However, the chaplains would come up and pray with us and just even take me and walk around the floor and just talk to me and let me know, have faith and you will see what happens.
I think the sort of humor or irony in this is that the 30% chance of survival in 5 years was based on chemo and radiation and surgery, but didn't factor in that prayer that we're aware of. And I think the difference in what happens as we go through this story is the real message about what prayer can bring to the table that all the other things that physicians and caregivers can bring does not. So you started the chemo fairly soon, and I think after his first course of chemo, he had a fever.
After his first course, he had a fever, he had an infection. A lot of times you don't know where that infection is. He was admitted to the hospital. He had a cough. So I insisted on a chest x-ray to make sure that it was not pneumonia. And he had the x-ray, it was no pneumonia, and they told me that they could see that the nodules were shrinking. So then he got better, went home, and then 2 weeks later we went back for his second round of chemo. He had the second round of chemo, and probably within the second day, they did another chest CT. And they did x-rays again of this. This was nearly gone. His nodules in his lungs, originally it was 20, they went down to 5.
And that was after a total of how many weeks from the very start of chemo?
5.
5 weeks. My understanding of the treatment protocol is that they do chemo for 12 weeks. And at the end of the 12 weeks, they do more x-ray studies and they look to see if there's a response. If there's, and they really don't expect to see any response at 12 weeks, but they're hoping to see that at least things are stable and then continue with the chemo for longer. If they see that there's been no improvement with the chemo, or that it's advanced actually, then they sometimes abandon the chemo at that point. So they really didn't expect to see any response at all until 12 weeks, and perhaps not even then. And now we're looking at 5 weeks, and you've gone from 20 nodules down to 4, and the size 5, and the size of the tumor has shrunk significantly. So the doctors at that point, he was outside the protocol, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, you know, he had a team of two pediatric oncologists, and the one said to me, I'm sorry, we really kind of have to relook at things because this is unheard of. He was originally supposed to have chemo actually 4 to 5, maybe even 6 weeks, but it depended on his counts, if his blood cells and counts and everything went back up. He ended up having chemo every 2 weeks. And the doctor told me that that's unheard of, and they couldn't explain it. So they couldn't really figure out what they wanted to do. They wanted to continue his chemo, they wanted to go ahead and remove the tumor, or whether they wanted to just do radiation. He also had he did medical oncologist, then he had a radiation oncologist, and then he had an orthopedic oncologist. So they debated and just kept throwing things around to try to figure out what to do.
So tell everybody about the prayer factor. Where did prayer enter in? I know that you one weekend spent some time praying with Hunter and touching the area of his shoulder, and certainly there were a lot of people, thousands of people who were praying over this.
We had a lot of support. We just had an unbelievable, I mean, he was on lots and lots of prayer lists, from his teachers at his school, you know, to people at work, to just word of mouth about him. And he would get on prayer lists. And I noticed God's working probably from the very beginning, because everything that I had expected and had been told that he would experience, he never did. They said he was going to lose energy, he would lose weight, he would have possibly behavioral issues, he would be very tired. Never was. Was a little boy. Never got sick. The only reason you would know that anything was wrong was because he had no hair. And he sported that bald head and was proud of it. We kept everything normal. And I think that that's one thing, you know, that got him through that. But I knew with everything that he was enduring, especially with all the children that I had seen at the hospital, you know, how else would he remain as normal of as a kid as he was if it wasn't a higher power?
And I recall when you first got the news, there were a lot of, we have an office that's like a family, and the rest of our family at the office was pretty upset. And I think Cheri from the beginning had a special piece about how to deal with this issue that told me that there was something more working in this than what was typical. Did you feel that piece?
I did. It was strange. I mean, not saying that I wasn't scared or I wasn't worried. Nothing in this world is worse than not knowing the fate of your own child. But when I was told and I saw the report, it was a very strange day, and it was a very still day, and I could see the leaves going outside the window. And all of a sudden, I had this sense of peace. And I mean, medically and in reality, I knew that children survive cancer every day today. But I did. I had this all of a sudden this strength that I knew that my child was going to beat this and he was going to survive it. But the only way I knew is that I needed help, and that was from him.
This was truly a unique situation. Kids do survive cancer every day, but this was atypical. It was a course in which he responded much quicker than any doctor could predict, and one in which the physician said that they just had to call it a miracle. That there was something higher, a higher power that was involved in this. And I think everybody involved in it could sense that this was just something special. So he ended up with how much chemo, and you want to finish the story and tell him about the surgery?
He had the 3 months of chemo, and then he had the surgery. They removed the entire tumor and the entire bone, and it was 99% dead, which means the chemo had killed it all. It never went over the margins, so he never had to have radiation to that area. After the surgery, 2 weeks right after the surgery, they threw him right back into chemo. And so he started chemo, he did another 3 months of chemo, and then he ended on Halloween of 2008, which was his very last radiation treatment to his lungs. So we say that Halloween is his cancer-versary, because that's what they call for kids when they finish treatment. It's cancer-versary. So it'll be his 3-year cancer-versary.
So we're 3 years past treatment. There's no signs of anything coming back, and Hunter's happy and healthy. And for you, Cheri, how has this made life different for you going forward?
My life has changed completely. I definitely learned about myself. I definitely learned about the strength that God gave me. I also learned how to have a relationship with God, and that prayer really, really does work. I think the most important thing that I learned is that life is so precious. And He gave us life. He gave me life. He gave all of us life. And He gave us life to live it and to enjoy it and to experience it and not take it for granted. Every time I look at my husband and my children and my family and everything that I have, I'm very, very thankful for it, and I know that that is the greatest gift that God could give me.
God bless you.
God bless you too.
You know, I think it's a wonderful story, and I think it's nice for us to hear it this way. When you go to buy a car, you talk to the salesman, and most people these days they go past the salesman and they want to say, okay, let's find somebody that's owned that car, driven that car, walked that walk in this case, and see what their experience has been. And that's what I was hoping this would bring to the table. Is that we've had a series on prayer, and we've talked a lot about it. And it's so important for you to see someone who's had such a dramatic change in their life, and something happened to this extent that's such a product of prayer, and the fact that they approached their prayer with faith that their prayer was going to be answered, and that they were going to be given life in all of its abundance to live, and that how they now cling to that and recognize the importance of it. How God, through all of this, can bring adversity to lives, or you can have adversity come to your life, and He can turn any adversity into something good, something special, something that reaches out and touches so many other people that have come in contact with Hunter, Sean, Tanner, or Cheri. And I think that's the way He works, and I'm sure that you see that in this story. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask Cheri before we conclude? No? Okay. Well, just one other announcement. They're setting up chairs across for in the gym for the services. I think they're almost finished, but I think Dave tells me that they could use a little more help. If they could get just a couple of guys over there for just a few minutes, we could finish that up. Let you get on your way. Let's just close in a word of prayer here. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this fellowship. We thank you for the opportunity to get together. We thank you for the fact that we live in a country where we can get together and we can fellowship together and we can worship you and praise you for all the things that you do in our life. Lord, we thank you sometimes for adversity that brings us to a better place, to a closer walk with you, that brings other Christians to our side and allows us to witness and fellowship and develop brotherhood with them. Lord, we thank you for Cheri and her courage and her wisdom in seeing all the messages that you have for her in her story and her life. We thank you for her servanthood, and that she can come here today and share that story with you, and how often she shares it with others at services and events in the area. Lord, I ask that you would be with us as we go through this day and through the coming week, and help us to look for opportunities to share stories like this with others, to bring them closer to you, to a place of comfort and peace and strength. These things we ask in your name. Amen.